Hello again, Reg Techies. Welcome to the only podcast that helps employers and recruiters connect with more candidates through technology-inspired conversations. Mastering recruitment technology is the key to hiring great talent. That's why this show exists. All right, so I've been in the industry so long that I remember when Greenhouse, the popular hiring software, was just a fledgling startup. I saw their founder pitch the company to a group of New York City recruiters at a meetup in Manhattan. That I think was back in about 2012, 2013. Now the company has thousands of clients across the globe and have become one of the most respected platforms in the online recruiting space. Today, I'm happy to welcome their CEO, Daniel Chait, to the podcast. Hey, Daniel, welcome.
Hey, Chris, great to be here. And I also remember when Greenhouse was just getting started, and it's kind of amazing to see where we are today.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that journey. I saw you back in February at that Hack a Job event. You told me a crazy stat that day. Do you remember that stat?
I don't know
About Airbnb.
Tell me.
You said that Airbnb, and I correct me if I'm wrong, gets something like 2,000 job apps every 30 minutes or something like that. And that blew me away. Is that correct, or did I mishear you?
Yeah, no, I don't know if it's every minute, but I do know that, when clients like that have a popular brand, especially a popular consumer brand, they often get thousands of applicants for jobs that they open. And so it's just interesting because we work with so many different companies that everybody has different hiring problems. And for some customers, it's like, how do I get candidates? I open up a job, there's no candidates, there's no talent. And for other customers, especially ones like Airbnb, where they've got a really well-respected brand, people love and know about it, they open up a job, they often get thousands and thousands of people. And so they're, companies like that are often in a position of being overwhelmed. And how do they actually filter through all the candidate flow to find the people they want to hire?
Yeah. Well, they must be one of your most prolific clients from that perspective, right?
Well, what I thought you were going to say, because we were talking about the origins of Greenhouse, is they've been a customer for so long that when we were first speaking to them, I think we only had a few dozen customers, and we actually didn't really have much of a website at all. We only had a landing page, and you couldn't really find out anything about the company unless you were talking to us. And it got down to the procurement moment. And someone inside of the company wouldn't sign the contract because they sort of didn't think Greenhouse was a real business. And we turned to our now CTO at the time, our first programmer, Mike Buford, and said, like the website we've been working on, hit publish right now. And we published the website, and then we called up Airbnb and asked them to refresh their browser, and the real website came up, and they said, okay, and the purchase went through. So yeah, those are the things you do as a startup, I suppose.
Definitely. Good story. So what was the original pitch for the platform? I don't think it was quite what you had in mind at what's become today, but take me back to that era.
I think surprisingly, it's not that different. Our pitch since the beginning, I can go back to literally the deck that we used to raise the first angel investor dollar into Greenhouse. And the cover page, the first page of the deck basically said what the pitch is still today, which is hiring is a really important problem for most companies. Most companies really struggle with it. We think we have a methodology that helps them get better at hiring. We think if we do that, it's a big opportunity. 4 bullet points.
Yeah. That's
still what we say. And I think what's changed is, on the one hand, we've done a lot. We've, to your point, thousands of customers, and we've in a lot of ways created a lot of value, helped our customers get better at hiring in the way that we envision. And at the same time, almost widened out the lens, and you can see how much more there still is to do and how far we are from really finishing that job. It's a little daunting, but it's ultimately, as an entrepreneur, as a builder, that's the exciting stuff. And so it still does feel a little bit like early days from that perspective. But what's been notable, I think, about Greenhouse as compared to lots of companies is how consistent that vision and that mission has been since we started.
Yeah, it's definitely we've been talking about these problems I feel like we've talked about these problems for 20 plus years since I've been in the space.
Yeah.
And I think we're slowly getting there, but it's definitely a grind, and
it just
slowly
is.
but surely we're making some progress.
Look, these are societal trends of the nature of talent and human capital. These are major issues of how does a business really work, and what do managers really and leaders do all day? These are not small questions. And so I think, you don't solve these things in a day, but they're worth doing.
Yeah. Well, Daniel, the job market is still fairly strong out there, but I know the HR tech space has seen their share of layoffs, including you guys as well. But tell me, What's the state of the industry from your standpoint? Where do you see things right now? What's the next 12 months look like? And give me some thoughts there.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think underlying it all, we've still seen a really strong job market, particularly here in the US, which bolsters, I think, the long-term sense that many of us have that, we're in the right problem space, that these are real issues that businesses need to grapple with. It wasn't just a moment in time. And so that gives, I think, me and a lot of others in our industry a lot of confidence in long term. At the same time, it's no secret that the buying environment is different this year, and companies are looking to save money. They're looking to consolidate systems. They're looking to spend less. They're looking, in a lot of cases, they're not hiring as much, and so that impacts most vendors, and most vendors selling to recruiting are no different. And so I think there has been a little bit of a slowing of growth in a lot of cases. I think we're fortunate in that we're still going to experience double-digit growth this year. But I think it'll nonetheless be a lower growth year than we've had in most years, where we tend to grow kind of between 40 and 50% a year. This just isn't going to be that kind of year.
Yeah, the golden age may be past its point here, I think, for the industry. But let's talk about.
I think this is maybe more cyclical
Yeah.
than not, and I think we're likely to return to a place where, in a normal buying environment, when you ask most leaders what's the top of their mind, one of the first couple answers is almost always talent. Yeah. I spend a lot of time talking to CEOs outside of our industry in all kinds of places, whether it's banking, advertising, media, tech, you name it. Issues of talent are top of mind for people. And so I do think that in general, it's a good place to be when you're in the position of solving talent problems for companies. This year is a year where people are, a little bit more cautious in spending growth, and that's okay. But I think in general that, it's going to return to where it had been.
Will that happen in 24? What do you think?
Well, they say there's two kinds of economists: those who can't predict the future and those who don't know they can't predict the future. I'm the first kind, so I don't know, but it'll happen at some point.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it definitely is a cyclical business.
Yeah.
Let's talk about AI and HR tech, Daniel. A number of vendors have launched AI or ChatGPT-like features into their products. What are you guys going to do in this area? And tell me your philosophy on implementing some of this technology out there.
Yeah, it's really exciting. There's a lot of promise and a lot of potential, and it's early days. There is a lot of risk and a lot of potential for harm. And I think we're very aware and cognizant of both. I think there's been a lot of really important work that's been done to show that a lot of the large language models have potential for bias and adverse impact against underrepresented groups. You look at some of the work that's been published by Textio and Karen Snyder, for example, around writing sourcing emails. She said, I wrote 100 sourcing emails, or I wrote 100 performance reviews using ChatGPT, and you see the results, and it's kind of horrifying. And so surely those things can be overcome, and those things can get better. But for now, where we see a lot of the promise is in areas like increased productivity. We have tons of great ideas that we want to do, building new features, adding value to customers. And so there's a lot of work that we're doing around developer productivity, and increasing some of the routine work around, like, building documentation and answering support tickets that just take a lot of team bandwidth. And if we can reduce those things through the use of some of these tools, we can just get a lot more done and spend our time on more high value problems for customers. So that's really the first set of areas that we're working on. And then we look at sort of enabling technologies for our customers that can make their way into the product. I think where we're staying away right now are in areas where it's really around making decisions around people. I think that's an area where there's real potential to amplify bias. And so Greenhouse is not racing to use AI tools to help say, you should talk to this person, not that person, or hire this person, not that person yet. But in areas like helping our customers to understand what jobs that they've opened are like other jobs that other customers have opened. That's an interesting question. If I know that I'm opening up a job that other Greenhouse customers have done thousands of times or millions of times, I can benchmark performance. How many candidates am I seeing versus others? I can think about where I should be spending my money on advertising that job. I can think about what interview questions other companies may be asking that I'm not, and vice versa. So there's a lot of benefits and productivity you can get without having to necessarily put the AI in a position of impacting individual lives and careers, which I think they're not quite ready for yet.
Yeah. Sounds like predictive analytics there, right? You're kind of,
Yeah, predictive analytics, I think, is an area. I think productivity and automation is an area, where these tools are primed to have impact in the very short term, for sure.
yeah. Even things like too, I could see it being useful like for analyzing the data sets of a hiring software. Here's how many openings you have. Here's your latest time to hire numbers. Just helping summarize that data for the average recruiter out there, right?
Yeah, yes, and I would say, for we need to be worried when we summarize these things. You're making a lot of decisions about what does and doesn't belong in that summary versus what was in the source, and those can be really problematic. I just had a meeting earlier this week where the person I was speaking with was trying out a tool that summarizes all their Zoom calls for them and makes like a nice little readout of the call afterwards.
Yep.
And so it's kind of neat. So we did the Zoom call, and then afterwards it sent this kind of like really well formatted, professional looking summary of the call to the two of us to say, here's what we talked about. Here's what Daniel said. Here's what the other person said. Here are the action items we all agreed on. And like, it was 90% right. And it looked really professional. So but it was wrong in some really important ways. And that can be really troubling.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful to understand what you're getting out of these tools, and not just like, if I had taken that memo really that I got from this robot and shipped it without any critical, input, I could get in some trouble.
Is there something you guys are working on now though in AI that might be coming out? Can you?
No specific announcement that I'm ready to make today, but yeah, like I said, I think in areas of, helping to automate, and make work more efficient, and in areas of really helping to help draw correlations and find patterns between and among the work that a customer is doing across many jobs, or even respecting anonymity across companies and different jobs. Those kind of benchmarking and analytical questions, those are really areas where we're looking in the short term, for a lot of problems.
What's your favorite part of the Greenhouse platform? You have one?
What's your favorite kid? I'll tell you, to me, we shipped a feature last year that maybe sounds a little bit wonky at first, but is really neat, which is called Goals. And at its most basic, what Goals does in Greenhouse is it lets individuals and teams document in the product what it is that they think good looks like for a given job. So maybe it's a goal around, I want to source X number of candidates per week in a given job, or I want to make this hire by a certain date. And you put those goals into Greenhouse, and then that triggers a whole engine of kind of accountability within the product. So if you're on track to meet those goals, if you're off track, and things that you might do to get back on track. And you can then start to collaborate. And really the key thing with Greenhouse, it's not just about recruiting, it's about the whole company being great at hiring. And that kind of transparency and accountability between recruiters and hiring managers is so often missing. And both sides feel it. I spend tons of time talking to managers. I spend tons of time talking to recruiters. Everyone points the finger the other way. But having a system where what the expectations are is clear gives everybody a common baseline and some good language to then improve. And it's really neat to see that working.
Yeah, very cool. What do you think the job search process is going to be like for seekers as AI starts to transform things? Do you have any thoughts on how it's going to affect them particularly?
Yeah, I think the trend that we've seen for a long time now is that the process of applying for jobs keeps getting easier. And I know people are going to go out there and grumble about what it takes to have to refill your resume 5 times on a Workday page. I get that. Jokes aside, when I graduated college, I had to go to Kinko's and print out resumes on ivory paper and lick envelopes and send them out. It's so much easier to apply for a job now than it has been, and that's just going to keep getting easier. And so, the job seeker is in a position of being more empowered, having more information and more transparency, and having more automation and technology to help them apply to more and more jobs. That's growing at faster than the rate of jobs. And so the average job is just filling up with more and more candidates because everyone's applying to hundreds of jobs instead of a few jobs. And so the next step in the process then gets harder. So it gets easier and easier to apply for jobs, but paradoxically, it gets harder and harder to get through those funnels. At the end of the day, you're still matching one person to one job, but the the work all goes into the middle of the funnel. And so candidates are getting ghosted. Candidates are finding that, they're not being considered for jobs that may be their favorite or that they may be most qualified for because they're applying in such a prey and,
Yeah, it's not going to help the black
method.
hole.
Right. But I think ultimately the vision of some of these automation and AI tools is to help alleviate some of that middle funnel burden and really do help connect people to the ideal jobs for themselves. I don't think it's there yet. I think the aspiration and the vision would be that ultimately, could we get to a place where if you apply to a job at a company that's using Greenhouse, you have a good sense of confidence and transparency that like, okay, this company is probably looking for people with my skills. This is a real job opening with an actual hiring manager. My resume or information is likely to be read. I'm going to be treated fairly and not prejudged based on my personal characteristics. Like those are things that candidates could know and would really help them target the right jobs for them. And I think we're excited about trying to solve some of those types of problems, because just making it easier to like click and apply, like that's already been mostly done. I think it's really the next set of the challenges. That's the issue.
Do you think skills-based hiring will become more prevalent in the future versus just a job listing maybe?
Skills-based hiring has already become more prevalent. I think it's fair to say that when Greenhouse was launched, prior to us, substantially zero companies used scorecards at all. I mean, very, very, very few, and mostly resumes would get handed around within a recruiting team and people would like scribble notes or maybe type it into a computer. And the idea that you're actually using structure to identify a hiring rubric and specific skills to assess for was quite new and radical. And I think now thousands of companies are hiring millions of people that way just on our platform. And I know others have followed suit. So I think that has already made a big improvement in how millions of people are getting hired. But to your point, I think it's still early days. And I think that, but the evidence for it and the more importantly, the workflow to do it and to work that way are now much more obvious and available to more and more companies. So I think it's inevitably the trend will continue.
Yep. Daniel, where do you see Greenhouse in 5 years? What's your paint a picture for me?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is I think we're going to continue doing all the things that we do well today. We're going to continue adding customers, growing in size and complexity, the kinds of companies and use cases that we can handle. I mean, don't forget when we started, and I talked about hiring or working with a company like Airbnb when they were just a few hundred employees, like that was kind of the only companies we could handle back then. And now we have global customers with thousands or tens of thousands of employees. We're going to continue to serve larger and larger, more complex, more global customers. And our own customer base has been growing and expanding. We're going to continue to expand into more locations, right? We opened up a few years ago an office in Ireland that serves as our EMEA hub. And we're very carefully and thoughtfully going territory and region by territory and region, and that expansion itself will continue as well. But beyond that, we're going to start solving more interesting hiring problems for our customers. Again, I just go back to that mission statement. I go back to that first page of my deck from 11 years ago. Our mission is to help every company become great at hiring. Have we done that? No. We've helped some companies become better at hiring. There's a lot more companies, and there's a lot more they could do. So we're looking at things now like, how are our customers spending money? How are our customers spending time? Because it turns out that most of the money they spend on hiring, they're not spending on their ATS. They're spending it on staffing firms, campus hiring, job ads, and outside recruiting. And all of that is generally spent in ways that are wasteful, mistargeted, unfair. But our platform has such reach that we think we can really help unlock a lot of value in those areas. We look at ways that our customers are making decisions and having like roundups and huddles and talking about who to hire and who not. And a lot of those decisions, they can be making much better, they can be making faster, and they can be making fairer. So I think there's a lot of progress for us to make on more deeply solving those hiring problems as well. So when I look 5 years from now, that's a lot of what I hope to have accomplished.
Yeah, very nice. Hey, by the way, side tangent here. Google for Jobs, have they ever reached out to you guys just to help you work with them more, or?
So just maybe not everyone knows because there was a lot of complexity in there. So Google had, I think, at some point 2 or 3 different job or career kind of related things that went on. There was Google Hire, which was kind of their ATS effort, which I think they shut down a few years ago. which was kind of almost a workflow software ATS product. Google for Jobs was their search engine product, which is really around when you go search, like instead of sending you to Indeed, we're going to show you our own job listings right inside of Google. And it'll, I think they were putting pressure on people to like include salary information and things like that. And so our feeds feed naturally into that. And we play nicely with that. And so if you go to Google and you search for job information, you'll find all the Greenhouse customer job posts there as first-class citizens, and it should work really nicely.
Daniel, as we start to wrap things up here, what advice do you have for maybe an aspiring HR tech founder about succeeding in this space? What comes to mind?
I would say it's a great space to be in because the problems are really important. But there are a lot of traps and pitfalls as a HR tech vendor or entrepreneur. And one of the big ones is, although the problems that we tackle are often big, strategic, meaty problems, sometimes the budgets can be hard to come by. And if you're a vendor selling to recruiting or HR, sometimes that may not be obvious at the beginning because it's easy to get people to try a new thing. And so you might get a few $1 million in early revenue from someone. If your promise is, we've got a new source of candidates, most companies will give you $5,000 to try it out. What I've seen time and again is that those companies often reach a plateau where the renewal and the next customer depends on continuing to fill up with more and more new candidates that they don't otherwise have access to. And that's just really hard to build. Or we see companies that look at what we're doing and they say, oh, we can deliver that, cheaper. And I think they find themselves in kind of a race to the bottom, that like, well, there's a market out there for really inexpensive ATS software. Absolutely. Is that a market you want to be in? And is that a market you want to win? I would caution, because a lot of companies have gone down that path of like cheap and cheerful ATS, a couple $1,000, easy to set up, easy to use. It feels nice at the beginning, but you find yourself in a bit of a dead end business. And I've seen a lot of folks go down that path.
Yeah, good stuff. When is the next Greenhouse open?
Greenhouse open. That's actually one of my favorite things about Greenhouse when you thinking features, but man, the opportunity to get together with like 1,000 or 2,000 people in person and talk and nerd out about recruiting technology is amazing. We're doing our next Greenhouse open in April 18th and 19th in New York City at the Javits Center in 2024. So can't wait. Super excited.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'll definitely be there. And last question, you talked about before we started how you're a distributed company now.
Yeah.
How do you ensure your culture in that aspect, right? How do you keep people engaged when they're working remotely? It's something a lot of companies still struggle with these days, I think. But what's your advice?
Yeah, well, first of all, companies struggle with that question, whether you're in person, remote, or hybrid, right? Mm-hmm. Good, solid culture is hard.
Yeah.
And that's true for everyone. It's true for us. But the answer starts with intentionality. You have to care, you have to prioritize it, and you have to spend time, energy, and resources in making it work. And again, that's true for every company, no matter what your configuration. So what does that look like for us as an online company? Look, first, we make sure that being online at Greenhouse works well. You've got the right systems and setup, you've got good collaboration tools, that the work happens there. We make sure that we've got well-established norms. How do you behave? I mean, everybody knows when you get together in a meeting room kind of how to act, but knowing how to be in an online meeting and having good ways to work on Slack, and what are the right expectations when you send an email at weird hours, to someone where you're their boss, like all those kinds of questions we've put energy and attention into. And it comes down to just prioritizing, what is the employee experience in an online culture. And then I think the last thing is we do look for lots of opportunities to get people together. And interestingly, when you're not spending all your money on office space, it does tend to free up a little bit of extra resources for get-togethers. We just had a quarterly get-together with our executive leadership team in our next level down, which we call our senior leadership team, where they spend time in person for a few days working on team building, working on strategic initiatives, and it's great to be able to do that. So we have a whole series of programs around when can we and how do we get people together face to face and make those experiences meaningful.
Yeah, very nice. Well, that will do it for this episode of the Workday Podcast. Thanks very much for joining me, Daniel. It's great to catch up, and Great to see what Greenhouse is up to these days.
Yeah, likewise, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Be sure to follow us on the socials, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn via the @RegTech Media handle. See every podcast, video, blog we publish. Thanks for listening, everyone, and watching. Remember, always be recruiting. Take care.